The Bear Essentials podcast gives older bears a place to gather for real talk regarding topics and issues that they can relate to. Here at The Bear Essentials, we aren't just having conversations. We are looking to provide actionable intelligence through real-life experience and expertise of our guests. Our mission is to build a strong community that elevates and motivates people to go beyond their limiting beliefs by helping them realize that getting older is not an excuse to hibernate on their goals, but a reason to work harder.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Charles Wallace. On today's episode, I speak with director Nick Palmisciano. Nick has put out an amazing, gripping documentary called Send Me. This documentary is based on the final days of the Afghanistan withdrawal. In today's interview, Nick and we talk about the level of desperation he witnessed while over there. We get into, unfortunately, what can only be described as the pure evil perpetrated on the people of Afghanistan by the Taliban. We get into some of what may be described as unlikely heroes of this story. And we talk a lot about the true heroes of this story, the members of Nick's team, his foundation, Save Our Allies. So if you haven't, please check out the movie, Send Me. It is available on Amazon. There will be a link in the show notes. Please stay tuned for my interview with Nick Palmisciano.
Hey, Nick, how you doing? Thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm great. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So, Nick, obviously, I know you've been extremely busy, a lot going on. I've been following you and some of the things you've been doing for a bit now. For the audience who may not be as familiar, would you mind giving a brief introduction of yourself?
Yeah, how far back are we going? Like the dark times, like business?
How about we'll go halfway if that's all right.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I spent 6 years as an infantry officer, left the military, got a corporate gig after business school, hated it, started a hobby. That hobby became Ranger Up, which was the first military lifestyle brand, grew that to an 8-figure business. Somewhere along the lines, made a movie called Range 15, and then a documentary about the making of that movie called Not a War Story. Sold the controlling share of Ranger Up, started a filmmaking marketing company called Diesel Jack Media. About a year into starting Diesel Jack Media, we had the withdrawal of Afghanistan. I was asked by some friends to help with that evacuation. 12 middle-aged dudes found themselves, either in Afghanistan or UAE as part of a massive evacuation. By the end of 10 days, we'd evacuated 12,000 people. Since then, I've spent about 3 months in the Middle East, another month and change in Ukraine as part of an organization that I founded with Tim Kennedy, Chad Robichaud, and Sarah Berardo called Save Our Allies. And I split my time now between running Diesel Jack Media and doing, NGO work with Save Our Allies, trying to make the world a better place. And of course, talking to you.
Yeah, well, Nick, I really appreciate it. And obviously, I could probably your career and what you do, so many interests that I have going into MMA, Ranger Up, all that. I wanted to compliment you on I finished reading and listening to the book Scars and Stripes that you did with Tim, and
Thank you.
I was blown away by that. And then
he's had a wild life, man. Like, he legitimately has had a wild life. And when we were talking about the book, we were talking about, what do people need out of a book? They need to see like an actual human and not like a caricature of a human. Like, so many people write their autobiography and it's like, I'm the greatest person in the world. And, we're all fallible. We've all made mistakes. We've all been down. And I think one of the reasons why we have so many young people that are depressed and so many, there is a generation of people that they interact through life on the internet more than they interact in reality. And the internet is just bullshit. It's the best thing, here's me looking, like at this angle, so I don't look like I've got extra pounds. Here's me on my best day. Here's me winning a jiu-jitsu match. Here's me, with makeup done to the nines. Like it's never like, hey, today sucked. I had a bad day today. Like I lost a business deal. I lost a job. My girlfriend dumped me. Like you don't see that stuff. You only see like this highlight reel. And Tim, wanted to tell the truth. And I was, it was an honor to be part of that, honor to write that book. It's really resonated with people. We spent 4 months on the New York Times bestseller list, which is pretty wild. So, yeah.
Yeah, it was, it's weird. I didn't know what to expect. And I'm that guy. I like to not only read the book, I like to listen as I'm reading it.
Yeah.
So I did the whole audio and read it. And then your name started to kind of come up a little bit in that book. And, I think it hadn't been too long after I finished the book. Then I saw some, information about your movie. And, that's when I was really like watching that movie just added a whole different perspective on all you guys. I mean, it was amazing. Nick, how long did you spend in the military?
6 years.
6 years?
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's interesting because I talk to people about this all the time. Like I've got, so many of my friends are like true heroes. They've spent a lifetime in the military, or they're Medal of Honor recipients. Like they've done these incredible things. And like I tell everybody, like I was a standard issue infantry officer. Like there's nothing particularly heroic or cool about me. But the military is a structure that has been invaluable to me, and like how to attack problems, how to live my life, how to be forthright in everything I do. And I think, one of the things when I talk to veterans, most veterans actually do really well. They do really well when they leave the military. They succeed like at a higher level than people that haven't served, and that's never talked about. But the group that doesn't do as well, I think they forget about that structure. Like there's two things that I always tell people that you have to have in order to be happy. You need purpose and you need tribe. And so like when we get out of the military, we lose purpose, right? It's the weirdest thing in the world because, I spent 10 years in uniform, 4 years at West Point, which like, I'm not saying counts as serve, but 4 years where you're indoctrinated to this, like, hey, you're going to defend the nation. And then 6 years as an officer. And like, when you leave, that's suddenly gone. And now it's like, you're a student, you're a civilian, you're a regular person, and that purpose is gone, but your friends are still doing it. And, every once in a while, someone gets killed. Every once in a while, someone gets injured, and that weighs on you, and you're not part of the team anymore. So, that is a heavy thing. But then also, when you're in the military, there's always a group of people around you that's trying to solve problems for you. Like whether somebody is like, having financial issues, or they got divorced, or whatever's going on, there's like a team around you, like, hey, we'll figure this out. And that goes away. And so like when people get in trouble, it's those two things. But also there is people forget that there is a structure that you need to work through for success. Nobody comes into the military and can graduate Ranger School, for example, or Special Forces selection on day one. You have to go through a process where, like, you go to basic training, you learn how to be in the military, and you go to AIT and you learn how to do basic infantry skills. Then you go to a unit and you have leaders that are involved in teaching you things. And like at some point, like they decide you're ready for Ranger School. You go to pre-Ranger to prepare for it. You go to Ranger School, and then still only a third of the people graduate. So we're perfectly comfortable with that in the military. But then when you're a civilian, all of a sudden the expectation is that things are going to just work. Like you don't have to pay your dues. You don't have to learn things. You don't have to suffer. And the truth is, like, no matter what you're doing, there is a suffering period, there a learning phase that you've got to pay dues and you've got to get better. And like, sometimes we forget that structure and that leads to unhappiness. So I always think about everything that I'm attacking. I think about in terms of that military structure. Like, I don't know how to do it yet. I'm not good at it yet, but like, I know that if I apply myself and I keep chugging away, I'm going to figure it out. So.
Yeah, no. And it, just hearing you talk through that, I mean, it makes a lot of sense from just me reading and listening to that book and then the movie and knowing what I know about you. I mean, me personally, I didn't serve, but my grandfather served in World War II, and just hearing him talk, I've always had an affinity for veterans. And I think, I'll be honest with you, I think what you said about that purpose and the way to do things, I mean, ultimately for me, it's probably saved my life, getting me back on track. And I think I've just have this affinity now to speak to guys like you and hear your stories. And more than that, I'm trying to present those stories to others, because I agree with what you said. I think that we can all learn from military vets and what is in the military without being in the military. And I think it will make our lives better.
Well, the other thing too, and I want to throw this out, like, I've been out longer than I've been in, you know, so I don't, like, I obviously have an affinity for the veteran community. You know, it's always going to be special to me, but you know, I have had people interact with me and help me and mentor me from all walks of life. There isn't a magical, like, only military people know these things. Like, that just doesn't exist. The roadmap is the same for everybody. It's, you know, the courage to try, you know, the wherewithal to get up after you fall down, you know, and the iteration, like not making the same mistake twice. And then once you figure something out, you know, being a good enough person to help other people with that journey, like, that's, to me, that's what it's all about. So whether you learned that from sports, or you learn that from your own business endeavors, or you learn that from getting your butt kicked in life, or you learned that from the military, you know, like this is the pathway of like a good person. You know, you try, you don't quit, you learn, and you help.
Yeah, I couldn't have said that better myself. I mean, I think that you just saying that, people see this, it's going to help people. And that's the whole goal of what I'm trying to do with the podcast, is get people like you to, you know, people can hear you and learn from it. So Nick, I know you had a lot in between. You had Ranger Up, you know, MMA stuff with Tim. I want to fast forward a bit. Obviously, I want to be respectful of your time.
Yeah, no worries.
I can't say enough about the movie. I've watched it 3 times now. First time I watched it with my wife, and you know, she was pretty blown away by the whole thing, right? Like I probably know a little more about everything than she did with them watching it. So the way I understand, you literally had just finished the book with Tim, right? And then this starts to happen, the fall of Afghanistan.
Yeah. So I was at Tim's house in Austin, Texas. And first of all, for everybody, we didn't mention it, but the name of the movie is called Send Me, and it's on Amazon Prime. And it details the final days of Afghanistan. And so I was at Tim's house, and we were working on the last chapter of the book. The book was due in a week. We had a week left to turn the book in, and we felt great about it. You know, it's a great story, and a lot of highs and lows. And then, you know, Afghanistan started collapsing, and Chad Robichaud, who I met because he was one of our first sponsored fighters when I was running Ranger Up. So at its peak, Ranger Up had 109 sponsored fighters. The very first sponsored fighter we ever had was Tim Kennedy, who then, you know, shortly thereafter joined me as an owner, and we ran it together, you know, for 15, 16 years. But you know, I think it was like Tim Kennedy, Damian Stelly, Andrew, and then I think Robichaud was like the 4th or 5th sponsored fighter ever had.
Mm.
And he went on to, win some championships in Strike Force. And, but then, like we all do, we get old, and Chad founded an organization called the Mighty Oaks Foundation. Well, his interpreter, that he spent the most time with in Afghanistan is a guy by the name of Aziz, and Aziz was trapped. And he was looking for help getting Aziz out. And then separately, a friend that I had introduced Chad to, a woman by the name of Sarah Verardo, who runs the Independence Fund. She's the spouse of a catastrophically wounded veteran. Afghanistan has a special place in her heart because her husband quite literally left pieces of his body there. And she has spent, her adult life making sure that veterans are taken care of, and that, and she felt terrible about all of the allies being left there, including her husband, Michael's interpreter. And so Chad and Sarah were talking, and at this point, Tim and every veteran is getting messages about, like, hey, who can help this guy? Who can help that guy? We had friends that had started, it was like a loose coalition of West Pointers that was, Allied Airlift 2021. And there were so many different groups. And so, we're just using our contacts to try to consolidate things in Excel sheets, get them to the right people, whatever. And then Tim's phone rings and it's Chad. And literally at the same time, my phone rings and it's Sarah. And, we're talking in different corners of the room, and they're both asking us, hey, will you go to Afghanistan? And full disclosure, at first I thought it was a joke. It was I'm 45. At the time I was 44. I haven't been in uniform in a long time. I've got 6 kids. But then I realized that they were serious. And then the questions went hey, I'm not looking to go there to be hey, I went, what is the mission? How are we going to do this? And we start asking these questions, and long story short, we kind of put together a plan, and, 24 hours later, we're on a plane on our way to UAE, and, we're linking up with other people that, had a similar vision, and with friend of a friend. And, one of the guys that we were involved with, this is how weird life is sometimes. Chad served with this guy, Santa Six rode motorcycles with this guy, Joe Robert. Joe Robert grew up with the Crown Prince of UAE. The Crown Prince gave us 2 C-17s to use and a place to put people. Simultaneously, this guy, Sean G., who was a former special operations intelligence guy, and another guy, Seaspray, were trying to figure out, they had some connections to UAE. They were asking UAE for help. Well, we were there, we kind of said, hey, we're going, why don't you link up with us? So now we have this team. None of us really know each other, but we all had that shared military connection. So we just basically looked around and said, who's good at what? And we just started working, and, Sean, if there's a hero of the whole thing, it's Sean G. and then Seaspray. These guys, they had connections on the ground, and they, Tim was able to integrate with them incredibly well. And, they were the guys that were running outside the wire and grabbing people and doing the extremely dangerous work. And then guys me and Joe and Dan were, loading planes and, doing some of the coordination work, at HKIA. Then we had a great team that was, in UAE they were doing all of the manifests and making sure that the planes were running on time. And, so we just fell into this, this group where we just basically slept for, 30 minutes, an hour a day, whenever we could. And we just tried to help as many people as possible, and until the bomb went off, and then everything, that was the end for the civilian effort.
Wow.
So yeah, I'm incredibly proud of everybody that was involved, especially, Sean G, Seaspray, and Tim, as well as, Sean H, who was a military, a member of the military that basically leaned forward with his team members, Sean H and Tim, and probably went beyond what they were technically allowed to do by a wide margin in order to do the right thing. As well as, a number of other, great veteran groups like, Pineapple Express and the rest of the Moral Compass Coalition, that were all trying to do the same kind of work. And, everybody just did their best.
So you talk about it that way. I want to just step back. When you get that call, because I think, and I wouldn't have expected anything less from you. You seem very humble, but I have to ask this for you and even Tim, right? Like, you get that call, and you mentioned you have 6 kids.
Yep.
Knowing where you're going and who you're dealing with. I mean, Nick, is there any like reservation, like the danger? Do you think about that?
I think that, like, it really hit home as we were landing, but not in the way that you think. Like, you know this, you're not a young man anymore, but like when I was 20 nothing, I looked at people my age and I thought like that person must think differently, and old brain is different. But like in my head, like I can still do all the things that I could do when I was, 23 and, and jacked and ran all the time, So you still think of yourself as being that person. So it was really weird. It kind of just like, we just kind of snapped back into military mode and like did what we had to do. Guys like, Tim, who was running outside the wire, like Tim is still in the military, in the Guard. He is still a physical specimen. Seaspray and Sean G, are still at that level. So those guys were, very current. For me, though, it was, just very candidly, it was surreal for a minute, but then it was like, all right, like, here's the job. Here's what we've got to do. And you just kind of fall back into it, like no time was missed. And then later you reflect on it. Like, sometimes I will ask myself, like, what the F were you doing? Like, how did you think that, but like, again, I'm just extremely proud of everybody that, whether it was with Save Our Allies or other organizations, including people that were back home just trying. Like, I very rarely have seen a group of people come together trying to do the right thing without any concern for who gets credit, the politics, like all, some of those things come later when people kind of retell the story or whatever. But, whether you helped one person get out or 1,000 people or anything in between, like, that's yeoman's work, so to speak.
Yeah. And, I mean, obviously you can tell me, I'm older, I'm 50, old brain. Like, that was one of the things I thought about was, oh my God, what must that have been like, even thinking about going over there? And I think what you guys did really well, what you did really well with the movie itself was, and you mentioned it a little bit there, was that I feel like you kept it pretty as positive as it could be, right? You talked about a lot of the people who played a role in it, the heroes. I mean, obviously you can't go into what I'll call a mess like that and there not be some blame, and we'll get into that maybe a little bit. But when you're landing there, what I think one of the other things with the movie, why I encourage everyone to watch it, is, I'll just say it honestly, and this is me, I don't know if Nick agrees with this or not, but I don't think we ever got the full picture from our media, unfortunately. And I think that the movie plays it out. So when you're flying into there and you see what's going on there, I mean, how does that hit you, Nick? I mean, because you probably were seeing what we saw. Did you have an expectation that it was as bad as it was on the ground?
So I already knew that it was bad because, Tim and I got there after Sean G and Sea Spray had already gone forward, and Dan had already landed and come back. Joe had already landed and come back with a flight. So they were telling us, hey, like they're murking guys right outside the wire if they get close. We had already heard about the woman that, got murdered right on the hood of some State Department vehicles, just so they could prove a point that they could do whatever they wanted. So we already knew that it was that, but I think seeing the chaos and seeing the desperation, like that was that you can't really put it into words. Like there was one guy on a radio running an entire airstrip, Sean G went to a broken airplane, found a part. He knows nothing about airplane maintenance and fixed an airplane. I mean, like, this is where we're at, do you like, I mean, there were planes that were, not functioning anymore, that broke down, that, like are pushed to the side of the road. I mean, it's like, this was not, this was like, you were not getting on these planes going like, oh, I feel great about this.
Wow. So Nick, if I understand the situation, and correct me if any parts that I may get wrong here, but from what I understand from the movie, what I read, they turned it over to the State Department, I think, which almost made that airport like an embassy, where the forces, like American military, weren't allowed to go outside the wire, right?
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So for some reason, and we still don't understand why this was the case, but if it had been a military mission, they would have maintained an outer perimeter. So think of it almost as like a buffer between the actual walls of the airport, and the airport. Like they would have kept people away. And they would have had the ability, to physically move outside and do things, create security, make sure, like, hey, you're like, somebody shoots somebody, they could have taken action. But instead, it got turned over to State Department. And I have no knowledge of why. So I'm not even going to guess, but State Department ran it like an embassy. So all of a sudden that goes from like, we're going to have this outer perimeter and an inner perimeter, and we're going to do the work between those two things and then come into the safe zone, to there's only one perimeter, and it's the walls of the airport, and anything in the airport is essentially USA, and anything outside the airport is Afghanistan. And so, we've all seen the movie where like the person is desperately like running for the embassy and they get through the doors and like the terrorists are on the outside. That's straight up the situation. So like if they got in the airport, they were safe. If they were like one step outside, they were still in Taliban country. It was not conducive to a safe operation. It was very challenging. And I don't know why that was the case.
Yeah, and it's weird because I think from, the news perspective, the media perspective, the way that was almost presented to everyone here in the States, it was almost like, yeah, we control the airport still, and I'm not military, but I'm sitting there going, you don't control the airport. The Taliban outside controls the airport, and they're dictating what happens and who's getting in, basically. I mean,
one of the jobs that I had when I was in the military after my normal infantry platoon was a mortar platoon leader. And I just kept thinking like, this airport is a TRP. And if anybody decides to start dropping even one mortar on the middle of this, one runway airport. We're done. We're dead in the water. People aren't going to be able to take off. We're going to have a real problem. And thankfully that didn't happen. But I wasn't the only person thinking this. It was like, man, one mortar round in the wrong place and like no one's going to be able to take off other than rotary wing. It was, we really were fortunate that the Taliban decided like, hey, it's not worth it to let whoever, take any of these actions. I mean, it would have been a bad situation if they had decided, you know what, we're tired of these guys holding the airport.
Well, I'm glad it didn't get to that point. The one thing I did also want to talk to you about, again, from what we saw on the news, it almost was presented back home here as like this positive thing. And it was the child being lifted up by the service member. And I personally have a whole different feeling of that being a parent, but I know that wasn't the only child. Could you talk about that a little bit? Because you mentioned the desperation, and that's what I see in that whole thing is pure desperation.
Yeah. So the biggest thing with, the delay in getting people onto the base is, we obviously, as much as you want to help everyone, you can't let people that want to do harm to the United States or others onto base, right? You can't. Which is why, first it was a challenge for people to get on base. Then they went to a lily pad country, either, Qatar, UAE, Uzbekistan, any number of places where they then might have spent months while they were getting, checked again. There are still people in all of these countries. But one thing that people kind of universally agreed is like, look, babies are not a threat, so, if AK fire kicked off and people were getting shot, parents would rush up to the wall and basically like, push children over, in the hopes that a Marine or somebody from the 82nd Airborne would grab the kids. And, there's tons of pictures of it happening. They were willing to basically separate themselves, knowing they might not ever see their kid again. But other people were even more desperate. And, when you think that you're about to die, your kid's about to die, you suddenly like, what is the only thing you can do? And some of these parents, these moms in particular, would try to throw their kids up to people, or even try to throw them over the wall, in the hopes that like maybe they'd have a soft landing or somebody would catch them on the other side or whatever. But the problem is that there was concertina wire on the other side. So it was a very bad situation.
So that's the other part that I was thinking for like you, for Tim, for all you guys, like, how do you know when you have a mission, but seeing some of the atrocity, I'll call it, you see some of those things, probably stuff you'll never unsee with the children, the babies. And you had mentioned a little bit, but some of the things that were going on outside the wire, right? They were pretty much executing people almost as a show of you can't do anything, right? It was just, how do you guys continue on doing what you need to do?
Well, again, the brunt of the work was, Tim, Sean G, C Spray. But I think Tim said it best. Like, you want to take the time to think about this horrible thing that just happened, that normally, like if you saw any of these things, one of these things happen, that would be like your day, your week. People would be like, are you all right? You should go talk to this person. Well, the alternative is like you sit around and you think about this thing, or you save another person. And so, everybody, regardless of, where they were, just said, hey, this is my job and I need to do this job to the best of my ability, because I know there's a ticking clock. I know at some point the US government's going to say, we're done. What can I do right now? A very stoic military kind of principle, like control what you can control. Mm-hmm. What can I do right now to make a difference? Like, I can't make somebody undead. I can't can't return a child to life. I can't unkill a person, but I can, go outside the wire and help this person. If you're on that team, I can put people on this plane. I can build this target package. I can make sure that the air is clear. Like, this is what I can do. So this is what I am going to do. And, we'll sort out the rest when it's over.
Hey, Nick, I want to ask too, you mentioned about like the guys who did go outside the wire, and I know what the rules of engagement were for our, official military.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys have any kind of rules of engagement, or were you allotted any type of protection from the military, or was it outside the wire? You were on your own?
The guys outside the wire were afforded no protection from the military, but they did carry rifles.
And it sounded like, from watching the movie, at least, there were incidents with the Taliban where they may, shoot or execute someone, but there was no time where they decided they thought they would want to shoot at your team or anything.
There were a few close calls. I won't get into details, but there were a few close calls where they essentially, in one situation, and just to be super clear, I have personally written up what I believe should be awards for Sean G, C Spray, and Tim, and I have sent them forward to Congress. I don't know what the status of these things are, but Sean G and C Spray both put themselves between, a Taliban gunman and individuals, and the Taliban elected not to shoot. And then all three of them were involved in another situation that is classified at this time that was extremely heroic. But fortunately, no rounds were exchanged.
Well, that's good. So as you guys continue, I know all the work being done outside the wire, inside the wire. I guess uplifting, discouraging. I wanted to talk about the buses. You get all those buses, and like, even listening during the movie, the absolute joy that you guys are thinking, 300 some people, whatever it was, coming inside the gate.
Yeah, it was a tough situation. That's one that, there is a formal investigation that is happening. Everybody asks me why, for those of you that haven't seen it, there is a colonel that essentially keeps 5 buses from coming in, into the wire, even though everyone has been searched and they're American citizens, and, all this sort of stuff that should have, to us anyway, been a reason to allow these people in. And I've been asked a lot, why didn't you put the colonel's name out there? Why aren't you, a couple reasons. The first reason is I do not want to blast somebody that is not available to defend themselves, even if I find their actions to be despicable. And, we were not able to get anything, from him on the record. So we're not gonna, I did not think it was appropriate to put his name there, because the time and place for that is the formal Army investigation. The second piece is, it's always easy to criticize, and I don't know what he knew. And what I mean by that, and I'm not making excuses for the guy, because I would have never made this decision regardless. That being said, there are rumors that the ambassador told him, under no circumstances are you going to let these people come on. If that's true, and it was a State Department mission, he would essentially be going against orders in order to do that. So then the question is it a lawful order? And that's not for me. That's not for me to decide. The other thing is, the bomb went off shortly thereafter. Did he know that there was a bomb threat? Was he worried that it might be? So I try to be as charitable. We were there worried about ourselves and the people we were getting out. He had responsibility for thousands of troops.
Mm-hmm.
And so as much as in the moment, if he was in the room, I probably would have bludgeoned him to within an inch of his life. But again, as an old person, you realize we are all fallible. And I think about it. I've thought about it. I mean, more than maybe anybody. It's unlikely that he's just an evil person. There had to have been a thought structure. And so, there's a formal complaint. I gave my testimony to the Army. Whatever they do is going to be fine with me. But that's the time and place to figure out guilt, not in a movie, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And I give you a lot of credit, and I respect actually a lot the way you guys handled those situations in the movie, because that movie could have been very easily a chance for you guys to just totally air dirty laundry, I'll say, but you didn't. So I thought that was commendable. You mentioned the bomb. So we start to come towards the end, the last days.
Mm-hmm.
I may get it wrong, but was it Blackgate or Abbey where it was the only way in?
Abbey is where the bomb went.
Okay. So where were you guys all within the wire when that happened?
So at that point, I had flown back to UAE. I was supposed to be flying back to Kabul in the morning. The bomb went off maybe 2 hours after I landed. So I landed back in UAE. Sean Lee and I took the night shift so that Dan and Leon could get some sleep because they hadn't slept in 2 days. So I basically got off the plane, dumped my gear, and then sat on the radio with Sean. And the bomb went off. We knew what happened before, the world knew what happened in terms of number of people injured and whatnot. But we didn't know where our guys were. We didn't know if they were involved, because when those things happen, they black everything out. So they basically use technology to kill, cell phone, sat communications, et cetera. So we had no contact with our team. We didn't know where they were because our guys had been operating out of Abbey Gate. Finally got contact with them that they were okay. They had been, Tim in particular had been with, a couple of the folks that were killed hours previous. And then the three of them, they kept, helping people get on base for a period of time. But after the bomb, they started, rebarring and cementing off, gates and entrances so that that's the sign hey, this is over. And then we got word that we were no longer going to be able to land any of our planes there. So then it was a matter of, how do we get these guys back? And it was it was a challenge. Ultimately, a military air crew just kind of said, hop on, don't tell anyone. And so our guys, were laying on a ramp, ended up in Qatar, and then once they landed in Qatar and they had no active credentials, they had to leave the base, and they hitchhiked their way to Qatar proper, the city, and then, booked a flight back to UAE. I mean, when I tell you, this was a ride. There was a point where when we had no communications with them, we were actively in the process of, renting a Black Hawk helicopter in Uzbekistan and we were going to go do like a rescue mission. I mean, like, you know, it was a wild ride. You know, it was a wild ride. Like,
Wow. So now that, you know, I don't even want to use the word over, because I know that you guys are still actively involved and still trying, but would you say though, after what you've done, you're back now or whatnot, is it hard to look at the positives of all the people you saved, knowing that there were still more? It felt like in the movie, it was almost this, it wasn't enough. You almost felt like you guys, is that true?
yeah, I have very few good feelings about all of this, which people don't understand, but you know, you probably can't see my phone, but you know, if I scroll here, which I know you can't see, I'm looking at it. I know you can't see. Every number in this is a +93 number on my WhatsApp. And WhatsApp is how everyone communicates in Afghanistan and Pakistan. They're all +93 numbers, and they're all people either begging for help or telling me that I'm a piece of crap and I've turned my back on them because I can't help them. And there's nothing I can do about it. You know, Save Our Allies has done as much as any other organization to help these people. But we don't have infinite funds. We are not the US government. We cannot approve somebody to come to America. We can't approve somebody to go to another country. Like, governments have to do this. And at the same time, you know, there are so few people helping that, you know, like our coalition, which we call Moral Compass, which is kind of a group of nonprofits that are still trying to solve this problem. We're all running into the same problems. Like, you know, at the beginning, you know, obviously during the operation, we got 12,000 people out. And then, you know, for the next couple months, we were able to get, you know, 500 to 1,000 a month out. Last month, I got 2. I got 2. You know, and one of those, when I say two families, one of those families, we weren't even the ones that finally got them approved. It was a Canadian group. We were housing them, but a Canadian group managed to like get them approved in Canada. So that was that's like 2 organizations working for 9 months to get that family. And then another family we housed for 9-10 months and finally got SIV approval for, and they just flew to Seattle. And like, that was a happy moment, but that family flew out. I still have right now 49 families and thousands more that wish they were one of the 49 families that we had in our safe houses. And we just don't, like, we do not have the resources or the permission to do what's necessary. There's also no international appetite to help Afghans. And no one wants to hear this, but I'm not a woke person. Like, I do not go and try to find like the inherent racism, patriarchy, whatever in everything. I'm not one of these people. Like, I truly believe that there is, like, you know, racism and anti-Muslim sentiment, and then even beyond anti-Muslim, anti-Afghan jingoism that comes to play with all this. So, you know, Save Our Allies is also involved in Ukraine, and that's an incredible mission, and we've done great work there with a lot of the same people that we're helping in Afghanistan. I can help. I can find a home for a Ukrainian refugee literally anywhere on earth other than like Iran and China, you know. I can't find anyone that will take Afghans because they're all worried about, well, if we let 99 good people in, but one person is a terrorist, it's not worth it. And it's tough, man. Like, it's at this point there, and I'm just being super honest, I get no joy at all out of doing the work, but I feel like if I stop doing it, there's no one else that's going to do it. And like the remainder of the people that are still doing it basically all feel that way. It's a very hollow existence. And so like, I just took a vacation for the first time in ages, and my teammates were like, go shut everything off. I put other people in the group chats. I didn't look at anything because I needed to like spiritually heal from being told every day, either please help me, I'm going to die, or you're a piece of crap. Like, why don't you care about Afghans? And I'm not trying to like make anybody feel sorry for me or for any of the people helping, but it is not a supported existence. The reason we launched the documentary is because we were trying to get people to care again. Mm. And it's tough. It's an upward battle. And it's like, I fear this time next year, the 1 or 2 family a month is going to be 0.
It's hearing you say that, it's sad, and I feel for you, because not just for you, I feel for those people, because I think a lot of people over here, they want to just try to out of sight, out of mind. Right. Yeah. And, we all hear stories, but I mean, and I'll say it, like watching that movie, knowing what I knew, but then watching that movie, the documentary Send Me, you guys were dealing with pure evil over there. And the fact that those people, the desperation that most of us as Americans will never feel, it's a result of that pure evil. And it's just, if people don't start to help out and try to support, I don't know what happens to a lot of them, Nick, honestly. I mean, at this point, you can tell by their actions what they were willing to do. I almost feel like they'd rather be dead than to live in an existence that's under the Taliban regime.
And there are some people that are probably in that boat. I do want to say, the two groups of heroes that I think there's been a lot of attention to our group, and there's been a lot of attention to, Pineapple Express and some of the others, but the real heroes for me are the 6,000 troops that had to stare out into that abyss, and they did not have the flexibility that we had to try to make it better. They had to hold the line, and they had to basically play God over and over again while watching people get killed and people suffer. And, I don't think there are a lot of people that will understand how much they had to go through. And I say this all the time, I hope the military is looking out for those people and their mental health, because that was a terrible situation. And then the other heroes, of course, are the Afghans that, believed in America and in their country and in a new Afghanistan, that then had to struggle and fight and claw their way onto that base. And, the Afghans that we work with that are here in America that are cutting out a new life, or, are starting to thrive. Some of them are starting to thrive. Others are just finding their way now. But like those two groups, like, really don't get enough attention.
Yeah. So that's kind of how I wanted to end. Is there anything that you can say here now, plug anything as far as like how people can help, how people can
Sure. Yeah. SaveOurAllies.org if you want to donate. You can watch or buy Send Me on Amazon. Everything that's made from Send Me, and by watching it on Amazon, we generate some revenue. All of the money that goes into that is immediately donated to SaveOurAllies.org. You can reach out to your congressman, congresswoman, senator, and demand, that action is taken, for Afghans. Politicians care about what we care about. If we don't care about it, if we're not harassing them to do something, then they don't care, So, and if you don't like our organization, I'll vouch for anybody in the Moral Compass group. There's a lot of people trying to do good work, but obviously I'm partial to save our allies.
Well, Nick, I can't say enough about the work that you guys did. I mean, it's amazing. I hope everybody checks out the documentary. Send Me. It's enlightening, and I said this to a friend of mine. I said, it's not the kind of movie you watch to maybe feel good or be entertained, but it's a kind of movie you need to watch to make sure you understand what's going on. And that's what you all did. And I can't thank you enough, Nick, for jumping on here. I hope a lot of people see
My
this.
pleasure.
Yeah. All right, Nick. Well, thank you. I wish you nothing but the best. And more than that, I wish you nothing but safety for you, Tim, all you guys. And take care.
This has been the
Thanks
Bear
again.
Essentials.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. And remember, never hibernate on your goals.